Okay, here we go. Hopefully you found it. 1 Samuel 18, verse 1 to 4, and you probably already read it, but I'll read it for us here. When David had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was bound to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. Saul took him that day and would not let him return to his father's house. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David, because he loved him as his own soul. Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that he was wearing and gave it to David, and his armor, and even his sword, and his bow, and his belt. Verse 1, the soul of Jonathan was bound to the soul of David. An image, right, of two souls coming together. In a sense, what I would say, two becoming one, right? Jonathan loved him, that is David, as his own soul. Now later it says that David loved Jonathan as much as his own life. So Jonathan loved David as his own soul, and David loved Jonathan as much as his own life. There is this mutual love between these two men. There is a mutual love between these two men, something that goes beyond just friendship love. Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his soul, a contract, but not just a contract, like an agreement between them, something binding them together, right? Sounds like, in some ways, marriage covenant. So we have other places in the Old Testament where it talks about covenant, and this is the same word that's used in these other texts. So this is the level of commitment and covenant. Other places, Genesis 6:18, God's covenant with Noah to save him and his family and every living thing. Genesis 9:9, God's covenant with the world to never flood it again. And God gives the rainbow as a sign of the covenant. I thought that's kind of a neat connection. Genesis 15:18, God's covenant with Abram to give him and his descendants the land, right? These are the types of covenants that we're talking about on the level when David and Jonathan make a covenant together. It says Jonathan even did what was common in most Middle Mediterranean love affairs, where people loved each other. They would give each other gifts. Jonathan, out of his deep love for David, made a covenant with him, and he formalizes this in some ways with solemn gifts. He gives him his armor. He strips off his robe. It sounds like he's standing naked. I have to be honest. Stripped off his robe that he was wearing and gave it to David, and his armor, and his sword, and his bow, and his belt. So he gave to David in this act, this gift for him. Next, there are three major sections about this. This is not just one section. There are three. 1 Samuel 20. 1 Samuel 20. And this is really in the last couple days, this is the first time that I've even really studied and known this. 1 Samuel chapter 20, verse 16. So Jonathan and David are kind of trying to meet up, trying to find and connect with each other because they're not allowed to be together because Saul doesn't want them to be together. Okay? Why? We're not totally sure. Thus Jonathan, so they're together now, they found a way. Thus Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, "May the Lord seek out the enemies of David." Jonathan made David swear again by his love for him, for he loved him as he loved his own life. So again, the word covenant. Now this time it's between it says David is going to ask, never cut off your faithful love from my house. That's a few verses earlier. And now they make this covenant, this everlasting bond. And it's a bond between houses, right? Their line, their ancestry, their families. So there's been a bond between the two of them, their souls. There's been a bond between their families. And Jonathan asked David to swear by his love for him, right? There's a sense that this love that they have for each other is so solid that it can hold an oath. It's that committed. David loved Jonathan as much as his own life. Have you ever felt that for somebody? I felt that for my spouse, for my love and my children. And so earlier back again, referencing, it does say, so David loved Jonathan as much as his own life. And earlier it says 2 times Jonathan loved him, David, as his own soul. Again, the mutuality of love expressed in this. And in this small piece, they talk about their relationship in terms of love 3 times. And this happens again later on. Now we jump forward to verse 41. 1 Samuel 20, verse 41. So again, as soon as the boy had gone, they found they're trying to be together, but they're not allowed to be, right? So as soon as the boy had gone, David rose from beside the stone heap and prostrated himself with his face to the ground. He bowed down 3 times, and they kissed each other and wept with each other. David wept the more. They can't be together. They're weeping. Let's go on to our final piece. 2 Samuel chapter 1. 2 Samuel chapter 1. We'll do verse 25 to 26. So now David gets word that Saul and that Saul and Jonathan have died. And so he lays out a piece, actually going back to verse 23, Saul and Jonathan, beloved and lovely. And so he talks about them, right? And he talks about Saul dying, and then he gets to Jonathan. And it is a very different type of talk. It says, how the mighty have fallen in the midst of battle. Jonathan lies slain upon your high places. I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. Greatly beloved were you to me. Your love to me was wonderful, passing the love of women. Your love to me was wonderful, passing the love of women. There is an intimacy and emotional investment beyond friendship here, even beyond brothers. When Jonathan dies, we see David's true emotions and feelings for him. Again, he talks about Jonathan in terms of love 3 times, and he calls their love more wonderful than the love of a woman. Now, really, there's not a lot of places where we find such strong language celebrating the love. Well, there's really no other place we find such strong language celebrating the love between persons of the same gender. This is this beautiful piece between Jonathan and David. And before we get caught up in sexual activity and whether they did engage in sexual activity, well, they were kissing and they were naked before each other, so we can argue about that. But what is just as important, if not more, and we saw this as we talked about marriage, is that David and Jonathan had a deeply satisfying and intimate love for each other that is explicitly compared to the love experienced between a man and a woman. It's beautiful. It is a beautiful moment. And so I'll leave us with that.